moment of truth. I'm going to hit the power switch here and see if we hear that single beep for power on self-test successful. All right, the nerd here has a dead motherboard in my PC hardware lab. I thought I'd bring you along for a quick swap of the motherboard. First thing I'm going to do, I do have my static strap, is I am going to unplug here and disconnect all my external cables. And now I've got to disconnect everything from the inside of the computer. Let me get you a better shot. Next thing, let's get everything disconnected from inside. I've got my auxiliary fan, got my CPU fan unplugged, front panel connectors, they're disconnected. Let's get down here towards the bottom. I have front panel USB, some extra back panel USB, front panel audio, got all that disconnected. Now let's get my power connectors. I've got my 8-pin auxiliary 12-volt power disconnected, and I've got my P1 over here, 24-pin disconnected. Let me kind of flop all this out of the way, get it out of the way here. And I'm also going to disconnect my SATA drives, and I'll get these out of the way so I have less clutter. I'll just go ahead and pull these cables out completely, and my SATA power. All right, I've got everything disconnected. The next step is going to be to remove the screws from the motherboard so I can get it out of the case. So the next thing is I've got to get the video card out, because that's going to keep me from being able to remove the motherboard if that video card is in place. Come on, little screw. And then I've got to get the screws that are holding the motherboard to the back plane out. Let's see, here's my lever. There's my video card out. Nothing special here. So I'll do a time lapse as I take all these screws out of the computer case. Okay, I think I've got all the screws out. Yep, the motherboard's moving. Now I'm going to have to kind of lift it up and work it back to get it out from under that fan. But now you can see I've got the motherboard out. I'm going to swap the CPU, heatsink, and memory to the new motherboard before I put it into the computer. So here's my dead motherboard, the ASRock. I'm going to transfer everything over to this Republic of Gamers motherboard, and for those of you keeping track at home, here it is. And the other thing you'll notice is if I have two memory sticks, they need to be installed as such. So let me get this stuff moved over. I will do another time lapse. Okay. Need my back panel. Come on, let's get that back plate. There we go. Now, my rule of thumb when I'm putting in these heatsink screws is start them all before you tighten any. See, I got one more on the back side here, trying to find my braille. Okay, I got them all started. You don't have to over tighten them. Once you get these screws down, the springs hold the proper tension on the heatsink to the CPU. And there is a hair right there. All right, so I've got everything done there. Now I've just got to get my CPU fan plugged into the CPU fan header, and I'm going to have to double check the manual. There it is. CPU fan is the top fan head. That would be a good thing to get plugged in. And there we are. Now the next thing I need to check is to make sure that the screw mounting points are in the same place from this motherboard to this motherboard, and move any of the support legs as necessary to get this into the computer case. The other thing I'll have to do is remove the old back panel from the computer case, the back panel that goes with this dead motherboard, and put this one in place. All right, I mustn't forget to take out my back panel cover. This goes in from the inside, so I'm just going to pop the old one out and put the new one in, making sure I don't get it upside down, and get it snapped all the way into place. Then I will be ready. There we go, all the way in. Now I can make sure that these legs, like that leg right there, is in the right place. All these legs are in the right place for the new motherboard. All right, a couple of the legs are in the wrong place. So to make it easier to move the motherboard support legs, I'm going to take this auxiliary USB out, because I don't really need it on this computer. And then to take the legs out, I'm going to use the hex head on my screwdriver, and sometimes these are hard to get loose, so what I do is I use this extra bar here as a breaker bar to get them started. So this one's got to be moved. All right, so by looking at the new motherboard, I can see that some of the support legs in the computer case are in the wrong place. So I'm going to go through and make sure every support leg is where it needs to be, and I'm going to use this hex head as necessary to move them into the right place. Get these moved over. And the main thing with these little support legs is you need to get them screwed in tight enough so that the screws that go with them, that go into them, will not make them unscrew from the back plane of the motherboard. So if this is too loose, it will just freewheel. If it's too tight, if you put it in too tight, there we go. If this is too loose, it's just going to freewheel with the screw that's screwing in through the motherboard. If it's too tight, you will actually strip out this screw hole on the bottom of the back plane. So I usually put them in hand tight and then give it about a third of a turn and get it snug. So I'm going to move all these around and get them in the right place. All right, I've got all my back plane support legs in place. They're all in the right place. I verified it. There's none where they shouldn't be. Now I got to do the delicate dance of working the motherboard in and making sure that it goes through the I/O panel on the back. And I can see, there we go, it's just snapped into place. Now it's just a matter of putting all those exciting screws back into the computer case to hold the motherboard down. I'll do a time lapse. All right, I got the last two screws started. Let me just tighten them down and just get them snug. You don't need to over tighten them. There we go. Time to put the video card in. Let's put it back in the slot it was in, position it was in before. Wiggle, 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 get it lined up. Come on. There we go. And let me get a screw in that. Let me go grab a screw to screw the video card in, and then we will hook up the bare minimums to get into the BIOS and see if this motherboard comes alive. All right, to get this motherboard up and going, I need to connect my front panel connectors, which is going to be virtually impossible for me to do from this viewing angle, and hook up my power supply connectors and then my video card to the outside of the computer plus keyboard mouse. So let me get the front panels in place and I'll bring you back when I'm hooking up the other stuff. I've got my front panels plugged in. I've got a nice video that shows you how to do that. You can watch that if you want to see how to do that. But let me get the power hooked up now to this motherboard. I am going to need to be able to power this motherboard on my 24-pin P1. Come on. It's amazing how much you have to wiggle these cables when you're on video to get them to plug in. And they go in right away when you're doing it off camera. There we go. The other thing I need to plug in, let me find it. Here we go. I need my 8-pin auxiliary power connector, and that goes right here where you can't see it. Alright, so I've got my powers plugged in. Now, it's almost the moment of truth. I do not need anything else to be able to power this computer on and get into the BIOS. I don't need drives. I don't need my front panel USB. I don't need my front panel audio. I don't need to plug in this auxiliary fan. I have everything hooked up inside the computer I need to be able to turn it on and see if the motherboard is functioning. So let me get HDMI plugged in, keyboard and mouse, and then I'm going to plug this sucker into the wall, and we're going to see if it does power on self-test. Oh yes, one more thing you want to make sure you plug up, because the motherboard can send beep codes at us if it's having problems. So let me put this little cheap piezo speaker right into the motherboard. Alright, I've got everything hooked up I need to get into the BIOS. Moment of truth, I'm going to hit the power switch here and see if we hear that single beep for power on self-test successful. And when we do, I want to jump into the BIOS and see if everything looks hunky-dory. There's the beep. Let's come over here and take a look. I'm going to press delete to get into the BIOS. And I think I'm a happy guy because I brought this computer back from the dead. Now, let me get in a little bit closer here. Excuse me. There we are. So I can see I've got a good CPU temperature. I can see both of my memory sticks are present. My CPU fan is spinning. My chassis fan is not hooked up yet. And I don't see any of my drives because I have not hooked them up yet because they are not needed for that first smoke test of the computer. So everything's good here. I am going to shut it back down and go ahead and get everything else hooked up so I have a functioning computer in my lab for my students tonight. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you enjoyed this quick motherboard swap out. If you liked it, please smash that button that content creators ask you to mash so you can see more of my videos. So I wish you all a great week and take care.